In this working sample, you're looking at the Tandem pull-out, the Tandem drawer slide with a pull-out shelf lock installed. When you bring the drawer out, it locks in position. It won't go in, it won't go out. And then you have a release lever here and here. And because of a synchronization rod that's built in, you can just pull one of these triggers and it releases the shelf to go back in. So the pull-out shelf lock. Now there's a disadvantage to the one with Tandem. While it's a really good one, you do need a way to get a hold of your shelf to pull it out. Blum also has a Movento, which gives you the option of a push to open, so that you can just bump the front of the drawer in order to get it open. So that's what I'm going to show you in this video, how to install the shelf lock using a Movento. I'm going to come around front and remove this pull-out shelf completely. That requires that we pull the triggers under the shelf, and then we're able to lift it out. Now you're able to see the mechanism, the locking units and the synchronization rod. That's so that they operate together. I suppose you wouldn't necessarily have to use that, but if you have a wide shelf, it's pretty nice to have this synchronization rod in there. So we're going to do two things in this video. We're going to replace these, because these are the front locking devices for a Tandem drawer slide. We're going to replace them with the Movento locking device, and we're going to replace the slides. And then we're going to install the push to open device for the Movento slide. They call it a tip-on. So let's do that now. Actually, nothing changes when we go from Tandem to Movento. We're going to replace the Tandem slide with a Movento slide. That changes. And we're going to replace these locking devices for Tandem with the locking devices for Movento. Otherwise, it's the same hardware for Movento as it is for Tandem, and it's the same cutting list for Tandem as it is for Movento. So let's start looking at the specifications now for creating a pull-out shelf for the Movento slide. Movento with pull-out shelf lock. Well, at this point we have the appropriate Movento slide that will fit right into the same holes that we used with the Tandem. So that's not going to be a problem. We'll put these in the cabinet and just screw it in. But before we put it in, we want to install on the slide this push to open devices, which Blum identifies as the tip-on unit. So that has to go in here. We have a slide. This is the left-hand runner and the right-hand runner. And this is the left-hand tip-on unit and the right-hand. Same thing with the trigger, left and right. So let's start by doing the right hand and putting the pieces, assembling the pieces to the slide. This is the right-hand runner. And when we look at the bottom of the runner, there is a notch in the runner here to receive this trigger. So we're going to put that into the notch and then spin it this way. And it'll engage here. There. Now we're going to also install on the right side the tip-on unit. So now we come from the top. So we have to line up the arrows, this arrow with this. Now we're going to put that in and tilt it, and then we slide it this way till it locks. There. It's locked in. The right-hand side is complete. Now the left-hand side. I think it's much easier to attach these tip-on units if the runner is installed like you see in this image. Now you can see that I've made the arrows visible. The red ones on the tip-on unit, and I put, well, there are red arrows on the slide itself, but I put yellow tape right where they are. So now we're going to slide this on, and we line up this red arrow with this one, and now we can put it on here. Then we need to slide it backwards like this until it locks. That's the best way I can think of to show you how to attach that tip-on unit. Just for your information, all of these components are marked left and right. Even though I seem a little bit confused, you won't have any trouble because you'll see left and right on each one of these pieces. One thing I didn't tell you about is this synchronization rod. I have to cut it. It's going to be pretty short. It's going to fit right there. So I got to cut a little bitty piece of this to fit in between these two tip-on push-to-open devices. That's got to come up. I want to tell you that we're sticking this in as a floor mount inside this cabinet. There's going to be no problem with that. This trigger isn't going to get in the way. There's an allowance built into the slide for that trigger. So we're going to install it here and use exactly the same holes we did when there was a Tandem in this unit. And now at this point I'm going to put the screw in here for the runner on the left-hand side. That's the only one I'll show. And I'm using the same screw holes as I did for the Tandem. I don't have to get too rough. There's the front one. I already have the other two in. Now the next step is I got to put the triggers on that actually activate the lockout device. So that's what I'm going to do right now. I'm going to grab these triggers and install them. And I don't know if you can read the writing on here, but it says right on here, top. So you can't get that wrong. And this has to go in the third hole. This little flange here fits in the third hole on the device. So we start here, 1, 2, 3. So our first flange goes in there. Now I hope I can do this. There's the place where it goes. And here's the screw. There, that's in. Goes in easy, as I said before, because there's already a piloted hole there. And here's the back side of that latch. Tandem and Movento for overlay drawer fronts have the same setback here of 3 millimeters from the front edge of the cabinet to the front edge of the slide is a 3 millimeter setback. And so that was achieved because we used the same holes. Now we're looking at the inside of our working sample with the Movento drawer runners installed and the tip-on units, or what the push-to-open unit installed on the slides. And so that's all ready to go. And if we pull the slide forward, you can see this trigger that we also installed in a previous clip. So now we're looking at this project here. When you buy the tip-on for Blum, it comes in a box like this. And it's going to include two of these, a left and a right. It will also include a left and a right trigger. And it's going to include what these are called adapters. And they go into the synchronization rod. You'll see how that's used in a minute. What is going to be required to get these two units to work together is to link them together with this synchronization rod. And you do that by cutting it out of a longer rod. So you take a much longer rod like this one, and you have to cut it to length. It's a specified length. So whatever your opening width of your cabinet is, from the front side, maybe it's a face frame, whatever the opening is, this rod, this linkage rod, is going to be 267 millimeters less than whatever that opening is, or 10.5 inches less than what that opening is. So that's what I did. I subtracted 10.5 inches from my opening width, cut this rod. So now I have a linkage rod that'll work in this unit. Then I have to install these little adapters into the linkage rod, like this. and then we press the linkage rod into position in the tip-on units or the push-to-open units. Now our cabinet is ready to fire. Now the two units are linked together. So whatever one side does, the other side is also going to do. These little orange dials here are to help us adjust the location of the Movento runner for ideal location so we can get the push-to-open feature. We need a little space there behind the drawer, so when we push it, it'll pop open. The next thing we have to do is get the front gap correct. We need a 3.5 millimeter front gap so that the Movento slide with tip-on will function properly. This is a front gap template. If your subfront or your front piece on your shelf is 5/8 of an inch thick, you use it this way. If your subfront or your front piece on your shelf is 1/2 an inch thick, then use it this way. So we are 5/8 of an inch on our front piece. So we'll put it in here like this, and we have to dial the front of the slide. This right here has to dial right up to that front gap template till it just touches. There. Now we are at our 3.5 millimeter adjustment. We have to do it to both sides. There. The wood components are assembled, and now the next phase of this operation is to explain to you how I arrived at the dimensions for the shelf. The pull-out shelf itself is made up of just 4 components. Let me just show you that. The shelf board and the front piece. In addition to the front piece, on the bottom, there are 2 side strips here that are fabricated, and these help keep the runner in alignment. Let's talk about the dimensions of this shelf and its various components. So to start with, let's look at the thickness of the shelf. According to the specifications, this shelf can be a minimum of 5/8 of an inch thick here, and they show that you can go up to 1 inch. The front piece, which is this piece right here, this front piece has to be a minimum of 1/2 an inch thick, and you can go up to 5/8 on the front piece. They don't make provisions to go beyond that for thickness. So that's the shelf and the front piece. How wide do you make the shelf? This way. How wide do you make the shelf? This has to be 22 millimeters narrower than the opening in your cabinet. 22 millimeters narrower, or 7/8 of an inch narrower than the opening of the cabinet. That's the width of it. So what about the length from here to here, including the front piece? The length of your shelf, including the front piece, will be whatever length slide you buy. For example, if it's 18 inches long, you subtract 1 inch and 1/8. And 1 inch and 1/8 equates to 28 millimeters. So if you're working in millimeters, and if that's the way you think, if you have 457 millimeters, then subtract 28. If you have 533 millimeters for length, subtract 28. That's how you determine the length of this, including the front piece from front to back. Now, what about these 2 pieces on the bottoms? The dimensions of these pieces, they have to be a 1/2 an inch high, 13 millimeters, and 3/8 of an inch wide, 10 millimeters. And that's how, and you make 2 of them like that, 1 for each side. And it's also going to be 20 millimeters shorter than this. You've got to have 20 millimeters right here. That's the minimum. So you have to cut the length of this to fit so that you have at least 20 millimeters right there. So those are the dimensions of this shelf that has to go right here on this cabinet. And now the next step is to attach the hardware pieces to the pull-out shelf. And in the case of the Movento, it's a push-to-open shelf, but it still has the lockout feature. So we'll attach the pieces of hardware. These are the front locking devices. They're part of the pieces that you order when you order the Movento slide. These particular locking devices can only be used with the Movento. So we'll put those on right now. The locking devices are in. Finally, at long last, we're going to put the locking hardware, shelf locking hardware, on the shelf. Now these are the latches. We've already installed those into the sample cabinet on the drawer runners, on the front of the drawer runners. This is the locking units themselves. They go on the back of the unit like this. One here, and one goes here, like this. Those are the locking units, but it's also required that, well, it's not required, but we can use this synchronization rod so that both latches work together. Now that requires some specific cutting. You get this linkage rod from a much longer rod that you have to buy, and the length that you cut this rod, you look at your opening of your cabinet. How wide is that? Well, whatever it is for width, you subtract 87 millimeters from that width, and that's the length you cut the rod. 87 millimeters, or 3 7/16 inches. Subtract that from the opening. That's how long you make the rod. Now for me, I like to put these things together first. I think it's easier. I'm going to put this on. And they are hard to shove into the linkage rod. It doesn't go easy. There. And the linkage rods are in place. I'm using 6 by 5/8 flathead wood screws. And I've already pre-drilled the holes. Now our locking hardware is attached to the shelf. Now that we have our lockout shelf hardware attached, let's see how the thing works. It's locked. It can't go either way. Pull the latch and push it back in. This is a push-out shelf lock hardware. Push-to-open shelf lock hardware. Well, there it is, the Blum pull-out shelf lock hardware. And in this case, it's the Blum push-to-open shelf lock hardware. I think it's a pretty good deal.